We are in this series called 5 Things That God Uses to Grow Your Faith. Did you know that our church is almost 20 years old? In just a few weeks, we're going to celebrate our 20th anniversary as a church. Yeah, that is so exciting. But here's something. Over the last 20 years, we've watched hundreds, if not thousands of people walk through our doors. And as people walk through our doors and join this community, there are some people who come in and they encounter Jesus and they begin this trust relationship with God. And their relationship with God is kind of continually up and to the right. They're always growing in their confidence in God and their trust in Him. That relationship is building over time. Their relationships with others get stronger and they find more purpose in their work, and finances start to focus around the things of God. Everything begins to transform. And then we have other people who walk into our church and they encounter God and they begin to grow in that trust with God. And trust is so important because without trust, we will never want to have a relationship. Trust is the key component to relationship. And relationship is where we actually walk out the things that we're learning. And so they'll start off really strong and then somewhere plateau and start to ask questions. Well, whose fault is it that my trust in God has kind of stopped? Is it my fault? Is it the church's fault? Is it my spouse's fault? It's probably my kids' fault. Most of us think that before we had those kids, we had all this free time and they stopped us from really growing because they're always pooping and crying. Then they turn, never mind. And here's the thing that we recognized over 20 years of watching this phenomenon happen, because we had to start asking questions. Why is it that some people's trust and confidence in God continues to grow and develop, while others gets to a point and then stagnates or stops or plateaus? And what we've recognized is that if you asked 100 people, 99 of them would say that God uses 5 key things to really help grow and develop our trust in Him. And there are really 5 key environments or places we can put ourselves in proximity to God and other people where God could grow our faith. And so we wanted to start off this year by kind of pulling the curtain back and talking to you. This is why we do what we do at New Life. Our vision here as a church is to help people grow in their relationship with Jesus. That you would, wherever you start, maybe you come in with some sort of trust in God or trust in Jesus, or maybe you're coming in and you would say, I don't have any sort of confidence in God. That's totally fine. We created this church for you to be a place where you could come and just ask questions, a safe place to explore faith. Wherever you come in on this journey, our goal as a community of faith, our goal as a church, is to help you take steps in growing in your trust in Jesus. And so we're taking these 5 things that we've learned over the last 20 years, and you're going to see that they kind of overlay everything we do as a church. And so I want to take some weeks to walk you through this because you deserve to know the secret sauce to spiritual growth. And it starts off with this. If you asked 100 people, what is it that really was the catalyst to start you connecting with God? 99 out of 100 would say, I started going to a small group, or I started going to Young Life, which is this high school ministry designed to help capture students' imaginations about God, or I started going to InterVarsity, this college ministry that had small groups, or I started coming to a church, and somewhere along the line, I started having practical teaching. Someone, somewhere, took the words of the Bible, the letters that talk about Jesus' life, out of the first century and into the 21st century. Someone didn't stop by just telling me what it said. I could read what it said on my own, but they went a step further to tell me why it said what it said. But they didn't stop there. They went a step further to tell me, here's some things that you can do with what it says. And of all the ways that Jesus could have taught, this is the way that Jesus taught. He went around telling people about these ancient letters that we know as the Old Testament of the Bible. For them, it was just the scriptures or these gathering of letters. And he said, this is what it says. This is how we translate it into the first century. And then this is what you do with it. And Jesus said this is key. He said, if you don't do this, then you're not building your life on a foundation that will hold. But if you do this, it's like you build your life on a firm foundation, so that when the waves and the wind and the rain of life come, they would not knock you over. In fact, they would just strengthen your trust in God. And all of us want a little more trust in God. And it starts with practical teaching. And then it moves on to the second one, which is providential relationships. And we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But I can almost guarantee that if I asked you, what is a catalyst or what's something God used to grow your faith, you could probably name at least one person. In fact, we're going to test that in just a few minutes. And the third thing God uses is private spiritual practices. If you asked 100 people, 99 of them would say, at some point in my life, I started reading the Bible on my own. Someone taught me how to pray my own words, and it moved from a Sunday experience or a small group experience to a daily encounter with God. Or I started doing things that were the teachings of Jesus. I started giving or serving or investing myself in other people, and wouldn't you know it, grew my faith. And then the fourth one is this, personal ministry. Almost every person you talk to would say somewhere along the line, I realized that life is best when I'm not living solely for me, but I'm investing myself back into the lives of other people. And when I talk about personal ministry, we're simply talking about living beyond ourselves, not stopping here. That's too small a vision for your life. You'll get bored of it. But living and giving beyond ourselves. And when we do it, we step out of our comfort zones and we begin to cry out to God like real prayers, like, God, help. God, I can't do this on my own. And wouldn't you know, it grows our faith. And then the fifth thing is this. As you ask people, what are things God uses to grow your faith? They would say there were pivotal circumstances, some good, some bad. Oftentimes, they're bad. They're hard. But in the midst of that hard circumstance, the words of Jesus leapt off the page to you. See, Jesus promised you something, and it's a big promise. He said, I will, and this is where it gets big, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. That the God who's walked with you to that moment, to that circumstance, is the God who promises to walk with you through that circumstance and out the other side. And so for many people, they would say, I had this circumstance, this pivotal thing, and oftentimes it's good, but oftentimes it's not. But over the course of that promise of Jesus wasn't just words on a page anymore. It actually became reality to me, and it strengthened my faith. And that's a big deal. When we talk about faith, we're talking about trusting God enough to try. Faith is simply saying to God, I have just enough respect for you that if you say to do it, I'll try. I don't know how it's going to go. I don't know how it's going to turn out. In fact, it might be easier to not do it, but I have just enough trust that I'll try. And so in this series, we're talking about growing our confidence or our trust or our faith in Jesus. Because if I can help us in any way grow in our confidence in God, it will change your life. Trust is key to every relationship. I want to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask you to do something that for some of you, you are going to be so excited. Like you've wanted to do this, you've hoped to do it. For others of you, you're going to be so mad at me, and you're not going to want to do it. And this is why we collect those cards first, because I don't want you to pray, please God, never let Kevin do that again. I get those prayers, but I'm going to ask you to actually turn to someone in just a second, preferably not your spouse. Some of you are like, thank God. Some of you are saying, come on, let me talk to my spouse. If your spouse is in your comfort zone, that's fine. Talk to your spouse, baby steps. And I'm going to have you answer one of two questions. The first is this: give the name of one person in your life who you believe God has used to help you grow in your confidence in Jesus. The name of one person. And the second question is for you if you're here today and you would say, I don't actually have a faith or a confidence in Jesus. That's okay. But I want you to answer this question. Is there some person in your life who maybe, possibly, there's a 1% chance, maybe, that God is using to spark your curiosity about engaging with him? So I'm going to ask you to preferably not turn to your spouse, but to find somebody else and to tell them the name of one person who you believe God used to impact your life, or that maybe God used. Ready? Set, go. All right, bring it back. Good, you got it. There are more of you who have been hoping for this than I thought. I said, say the name, not tell the story, not rate the service so far, just say the name. I've lost control. I love it. I love it. Keep on talking after service is over. I would guess that every one of us has someone. Now, you might think you don't. You might think, nope, I'm an island. I came to put my trust in Jesus all on my own. No one else impacted me. And I actually grew into the fullness of all God desired for me to be, in understanding who God is and who I am, and understanding relationships with other people and with the world. I did it all on my own. And I would say two things. If that's you, one, you're the exception to the rule. And two, I would guess that if you really dug down, there's someone there. Because God virtually always uses people to impact our faith. I can think of three people just off the top of my head. The first was a guy I met when I was 16 years old. He was a college student. His name was Forrest Jackson. Everything about him was cool. Even his name was cool. Forrest Jackson. Come on. Forrest had a beard. Listen, I started shaving once a week my sophomore year of college just to try to start growing facial hair. And Forrest had a beard. He was fantastic. Forrest was the wrestling coach at my high school, which made him super cool. And Forrest, for some reason, took interest in me. I'd come to find out later that Forrest was a volunteer for this great high school ministry called Young Life. Now, Young Life is a ministry that doesn't invite high school and junior high students to come to us, but goes to high school and junior high students. And so Forrest was this college student, a Christian guy who was hanging out at the high school, coaching wrestling, simply so that he could invest in high school students. And so he started coming to my soccer games. And then he invited me out to lunch. And he didn't start inviting me to church. He just said, hey, do you want to hang out? Do you want to connect? Do you want to just share life together? And then one day he said, hey, do you want to come to this thing called Club? It's for this group called Young Life, and we sing songs and play games, and then someone talks a little bit about their experience with Jesus. And I didn't know for sure, so I sent my twin brother ahead of me. I said, you go scout out the land. And so he went. He came back and said, there are cute girls there. And I said, I feel like God's telling me to go. And so I went for the girls, but I stayed for the God. And over the course of time, God grew my faith. And I put my trust in Jesus as a 17-year-old young man. And then Forrest said, hey, do you want to get together weekly and just talk about life and faith? And I didn't know what he was doing. He was inviting me into a small group. And so we started talking about God and life and faith. And I can tell you, even though it was almost 21 years ago, that God used Forrest, when I look back in the rearview mirror of my life, that God used Forrest as a providential relationship to grow my trust in him. Fast forward a few years, I'm a senior in college doing my undergrad at Sonoma State. And I loved God, and I loved talking to people about Jesus, but I didn't really understand community, so I wasn't really fully connected in. I was going to New Life, and I told you about that story last week. And one day I was sitting outside, and if you would have seen me in college, and I promise I'll share pictures at some point, you would have seen me with bleached spiked hair and a tongue ring, engaged ears. You could put pencils through my ears. It was exciting. And I smoked about a half a pack of menthol cigarettes a day. I would joke that it was better than brushing my teeth. It gave me that minty flavor every morning. And one day, your cards were already turned in. And one day, I'm sitting outside talking to a group of people about Jesus and having a cigarette, and this young woman says, well, I want to put my trust in Jesus. And I said, that's great. Let's finish our smoke, and then we can pray, and you can commit your life to Jesus. And as we were having this conversation, this college pastor named Andrew, he was part of a ministry called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, which I would later go on staff with. Andrew walks by and he says, hey, Kevin, would you like to come hang out with a group of guys and myself? We meet every Friday morning at like 7:30, and we study the Bible together, and we talk about life. And I said, sure, I'd love to. So every Friday morning I showed up with my cinnamon and brown sugar Pop-Tarts, my Mountain Dew, and my menthol cigarette. That's how I went to Bible study for my first ever Bible study. And we studied the story of Jesus' life in the book of Mark, and it changed my life. And then I graduated from college, and as I was graduating, Andrew said to me, Kevin, I think that God might be inviting you into full-time vocational ministry. And no one had ever said that to me before. No one had ever believed something like that for me. And he said, I want to invite you to come and intern with us with InterVarsity, and we aren't going to pay you. We want to give you a chance to try this out. And I did. And I wonder if I would be standing here today if Andrew hadn't said to me, I believe God might be inviting you to something beyond yourself. And I look in the rearview mirror of my life, and I see that Andrew was a providential relationship who grew my trust in Jesus and changed my life. And then I think about joining staff. I've been on staff at this church for 10 years. And I could name any of our team, but I want to talk about our executive pastor, Angela. Angela has shown me over the course of our friendship and our relationship that following Jesus is both a decision and a journey. I'm a very black and white guy, yes and no, in and out. And so for me, it was a decision. I do it, that's it. She helped me realize that people are on a journey with God and that I need to give myself space to be on a journey with God, and that I will lead us best if I give us space to be on a journey with God. And she shaped the way I understand God and discipleship and faith. And as I look in the rearview mirror of my life, I can say Angela has been a providential relationship. I could name 10 more people. Some of you are in this room right now. And I'm guessing that you and I aren't so different. That if you look back on your life, there's 1 or 2 or 3 people. Because God uses relationships to grow our faith in him. He always has, and he always will. None of us grows our faith or our trust in God in a vacuum. But the opposite is also true. How many of us have had someone who we would say, looking in the rearview mirror of our life, they undermined my confidence in God. They made me trust God a little bit less. As I look at my life, my friendships, my finances, my future are less than what I hoped they would be because of that relationship. How many of us would say that if we're totally honest, our biggest regrets in life have someone's name associated with them? I wish I'd never gone on that date with him. I wish I'd never called her back. I wish I'd never made that business deal. I wish I'd never done that investment with that person. The truth is, relationships can either grow our confidence in God or they can erode our confidence in God. And so we have a role to play in choosing the relationships that would grow our confidence in him. And if we choose wisely, we'll experience some great things. I want to take us to a little verse, a little passage in the Older Testament of the Bible. It's written by a guy who is one of the wisest people who ever lived. Now, I'll tell you this right now, that this guy, God asked him, hey, what would you like? God showed up to him one day and said, I'll give you anything you want. He said, you can have money, you can have fame, you can have whatever you want. And this guy said, I'd like wisdom to lead the people. And God said, that's great. I'm going to give you wisdom, and I'll give you these other things as well. Now, here's the problem with this guy, and this might be the reason why you stopped coming to church at some point. This guy didn't do everything he said. You ever meet a Christian like that who doesn't do everything they say? If you have, listen, I'm sorry, but guess what? You just met a human being. At least Christians acknowledge it and do our best to follow. But this guy, Solomon, great example of a guy who knew the right thing to do and did it, and his greatest regrets in life, he writes about them towards the end of his life. His greatest regrets were when he did not act on the things he knew to be true. But Solomon says something that I think is profound, and if you've been at New Life for 2-3 years, you know the verse I'm going to use right now. This goes back to last week's message. It's not about knowing it, it's about doing something with it. But Solomon says this. He says, if you choose to walk with wise people, you will become wise. But a companion of fools suffers harm. Now, this isn't a mandate, it's an observation. Solomon says, from observing humanity, I can tell you this for sure. If you want to hedge your bets in life, if you want to hedge your bets that you're going to make wise choices and be happier and better than you, in 2 years than you are today, walk with wise people. But I'll tell you the opposite is also true. If you have a companion of he calls fools, or we'll say unwise people, they will ultimately lead you to unwise places. Which is why I like to say, if you show me your friends, I'll show you your future. And I can show you with startling accuracy the direction and quality of your life based on the friends you and I choose. Because if we walk with the wise, we will become wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. Now, there's this guy who wrote the majority of the New Testament who picks up on this idea. His name is Paul, and we know him as this great guy who planted churches all over the ancient world. He was a faith growth expert, but before he was any of that, he was a hater of Christians. He hated Jesus followers. If you're here and you hate Jesus followers, listen to this guy. He hated Jesus followers so much that they would have these small group Bible studies, and he would go in and he would pull them out, and some would get thrown in prison and some would be killed. He hated them. And then one day he had an encounter with Jesus. And here's what I hope for you. I hope that these environments that we create at New Life are so enticing that you keep coming back week after week after week, even if you don't believe. Because I think that if you keep coming back, eventually you're going to have an encounter with Jesus. And like Paul, you might be on the stage one day instead of me. So Paul has this encounter with Jesus, and it changes and transforms his life. And he goes on to talk about the keys to growing in your faith. And this is something that we want for all of our kids, if we're totally honest. We'd like to put this up on their wall. We want to plaster it. Here's what he says in the letter of 1 Corinthians. He says, there it is, do not be misled. Why? Because many of us are misled. So he's giving us a caveat. He said, you're going to miss it. Don't miss it. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. And if you're a product of the 70s, you would say, yeah, but they have some good music. Bad. Yes. Me and you, just the two of us enjoyed that, but it was enough. Why does he say that? Why does he say don't be misled? Because we're misled. Because we think it doesn't matter who we connect with. We are an island unto ourselves. It's just not true. Which is why parents who are wise, they figure out who their kids are hanging out with. Which is why I serve in my kids' school. It's partially altruistic. I love serving and investing myself, but partially I want to see who's in my kids' classes, what they're doing, what they're like, because one of these days, one of these kids is going to come to me and say, I want to date your daughter. And I want to know who this kid is. And I'm going to have a space for him up front. People ask me sometimes, like, hey, are you going to get a gun? No, I'm kind of a nonviolent guy. I'm not going to get a gun. I've got the Bible, and the Bible's known as the sword of God's word. So I'm just going to put him in the front, and I'm going to slash him with the sword. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't do that. But I'll tell you, wise parents watch who their kids date, watch who their kids hang out with. I remember one time I was going to this church. I wasn't really following Jesus, going to this church, and the pastor was the nicest man in the world. Big teddy bear guy, really soft, really kind. His voice was super soothing, which is why I fell asleep in church at least half the time. True story. And then one day I noticed he's got a really cute daughter. And so I asked her out on a date, and I went to pick her up, and this really kind, nice, soothing, grandfatherly pastor was not nice or kind or soothing. Why? Because he knew bad company, which is kind of what I was, corrupts good character. I did not go on to marry her because I got to marry Maria. So praise God for that. Like, I got this smoking hot wife named Maria, who I love. Love her. She's fantastic. Speaking of Maria, I want you to imagine something with me, and this would never obviously happen in the real world. But imagine with me, if Maria and I are getting ready for a date on a Friday night. She's all dressed up. She is looking awesome. And then we get into a big discussion, which is what Christians call fights, right? We get in this big discussion. And let's just imagine for a second that it's 95% my fault. I know, you know me, and you would think that could never happen. Just imagine. I know you've never gotten ready for a date or gotten ready for church and it's turned into a fight. I know that would never happen for you, but let's just imagine it happened for me. And we get into a big discussion. It's the biggest discussion we've had in a long time. It's a blowout discussion. And she leaves. And she goes to a friend's house. You know what I don't want? I don't want her to go to a friend who says to her, you can do better than Kevin. He's a jerk. Dump the chump. You're only 30-ish, 30-something. You're only 30-something. You're in the prime of your life. Start over. You married too young. Get rid of him. In fact, you look fantastic. Let's go out dancing tonight and see what happens. I do not want that friend for my wife in that moment, and neither do you. And my wife does not want that friend for me in that moment. Neither do you. Why? Because we know that our friends influence the direction and quality of our lives. We know it. By the way, just so you know, that is a totally hypothetical conversation. My wife and I have never said a crossword to each other. So, in case you were concerned, it doesn't happen. We only ever write letters of encouragement and apology. So the question becomes, what do we do with this information? Because remember, information won't change your life. In fact, almost every one of us would say, I know that's true. I know it's true. So what do we do? Well, I want to tell you what the church's role is, and then I want to tell you what your job is, because you have a role to play, and the church as an organization has a role to play. The church's job is to create environments where providential relationships can form. Because none of us can go out into the lobby right after this and say, hi, my name's Kevin. I think we should have a providential relationship. That is weird. No one will want to be your friend. Don't do that. You can't do it. Providential relationships are almost only ever recognized in the rearview mirror of our lives. I started having coffee with this person, and a year later I realized they've shaped my view of God. I got moved to a different department, sat in a cubicle, and that person next to me was a Jesus follower, and they invited me to church. Or I had a Christian boss, or I moved into a new neighborhood, and I started talking to my neighbors. We were watering our plants, and wouldn't you know, they shaped it. But we didn't know in the moment. It was only in the rearview mirror of our lives. I can't guarantee it for you. What I can do and what we can do and what we should do as a church is to create space where providential relationships could form, which is why I believe so strongly in life groups. Life groups are simply small little communities that give you the opportunity to maybe form a providential relationship. If out of a group of 8 or 10 or 15, or out of going to 5 or 6 groups to find the right fit, you find one providential relationship, it could be a game changer for your life. I'm not talking about everybody becoming besties. I'm talking about finding 1 or 2 or 3 key people who challenge and shape your trust in God, which is why I firmly believe that circles are better than rows. We're in rows right now. I love rows. I make my living communicating to people in rows. I love seeing you. Honestly, when I walk out here and I see your smiling faces or your stoic faces, but mostly your smiling faces, like you are beautiful and smart, and I love being with you. I love rows, but I'm telling you, rows won't transform your life. They will get you to a certain place. You will hit your plateau. And then you'll start saying, yeah, that Kevin, he was funny, but not so funny anymore. Oh, that Kevin, I've heard everything he has to say. Like, remember the good old days when Ron was the pastor? And then I know what you're going to do. Ron's our founding pastor. You're going to show up with a red hat with Ron's face on it and say, make New Life great again. And you're going to be like, bring back Ron. I know. That's inappropriate. Yeah. Should cut that out of the video. How could he say that? Because it's hilarious. I'm telling you. I'm just telling you the truth. If you don't find a few key relationships, at some point your life will begin to plateau and you'll wonder why. And it's because you have not found a few people to walk this journey out with you. So our job is to create space, and we're working on that right now. We had an incredible life groups pastor. Her name is Elise. She was our life groups pastor for a number of years, and she took us to have the most groups we've ever had. She was diagnosed with epilepsy a while back and took a medical leave and then transitioned off staff for the sake of her own health. And she's part of our community. I love her. Her family and our family are good friends. She has shaped my life. But in the midst of it, I've been kind of overseeing groups. And so we've just been kind of hovering where we currently are. I recognize and I dream about a day when everyone who wants to get into a group has space to get into a group. I dream about that day. We're currently not there. Currently, our groups are maxed out. Normally in January, I'd be telling you about 5, 6, 10 new groups that you could join. We don't currently have those. So I started dreaming with our Life Groups Mentors team because I believe that community matters. And I said, what if we spent the next 2 months just creating a pipeline for potential people to lead groups, to create space where providential relationships could form? They said, yeah, that's what we should do. We should do it. So I want you to grab your program. Inside of it, there's a little quarter sheet that says life is better connected. Some of us are here, and I want to invite you. You believe everything I'm saying. You've been around. You've experienced relationship. If you love people, if you're a people person, you love people, could I ask you to consider, not sign in blood, just consider the potential or the possibility of becoming a life group facilitator. If you take this card and you just mark down, I'm interested in facilitating an adult life group, and put your name and email on it, you're not saying yes to anything. You're saying, I'm open to God using me to create space for providential relationships. What myself and our mentors team would do is we'll contact you. We've got a little application process that you go through to see if it's the right fit for you, if you have the right DNA to be able to host. And then what we do is we train you and develop you to give you the tools you need to succeed in the thing you want to do. If that's you, would you just mark it down? I'm dreaming about Easter, which Easter is April Fool's Day this year, which is so fun. You know, Jesus is like, hey, I guess I'll never see you guys again. 3 days later, April Fools, and then he was back. It was amazing. Just get ready. I've got 2 more months to think through more. After Easter, I want to start a promotion for groups. I'd like to have 15 or 20 groups, quite honestly. In order for that to happen, 20 or 30 of us have to sense God saying, yeah, that's me. I want to facilitate. If that's you, mark it down. You know what I dream about for our church? I dream about being the safest place for anyone in Sonoma County to come and explore their faith in Jesus. I think that's what the church is designed for. Part of what I want to do is I want to form groups that give you a safe place, if you're not a follower of Jesus, to ask your questions. Not to have someone preach at you or tell you what you should believe, but to get in circles, get in living room environments and ask your questions about faith and get real answers and have real conversations. If you love people and you would like to facilitate a group like that, we're calling them starting point groups, but if you love people, the next spot down says, I want to facilitate, or I'm interested in facilitating a life group for people exploring faith in Jesus. Here's what I'm looking for someone like that. You have to deeply love people right where they are and understand that we're all on a journey together. If that's you, I'm dreaming about starting in April, having these starting point groups available for people to have real conversations about real things that matter to them, about their faith. If that's you, would you mark it down? And then in the back of the room, we're going to have little baskets. Just drop it in the basket or give it to a guest service member on the way out. One of the things we've learned about groups over the last 3 years is that groups are the key place to form healthy relationships with God and other people. They give you the best shot to learn how to have a healthy relationship with God and others. We started talking about groups years ago and saying, how can we maximize that? And one of the things we tried to do was we wanted to have all of our groups be message-based groups so that it streamlines where we're all going and we're all going somewhere together. Over the last 3 years, you guys have killed it. You formed relationships. You see God moving in your life. And many of you have asked, yeah, but could we study other things? Like, could it be that we have a group of 5 or 6 couples? 3 of those couples are really struggling in their marriage. Could we study a marriage curriculum? Or we've got a group of people and we really want to study a book of the Bible. That book of Numbers has just been eating away at us. Could we study the book of Numbers? Or how about this? We're in a group, but none of us really knows what to do with our lives. And Kevin's not talking about calling and vocation right now. Could we do a study on calling and vocation and what to do? And we heard you. So in April, we're actually going to open up the pathways, things you can study in groups. You could study message-based groups if that's what God's inviting you to. You could study a topic-based group. You could study a book of the Bible. We're going to have some curriculum for you if you want to do that. The key, though, and we're never going to lose this, and if I think we're in danger of it, I'm going to rein us back in. We're never going to lose the heart of groups, which is healthy relationships with God, healthy relationships with people. Man, I believe in this so much. I'm dreaming about a day when every single one of our children has a group. Just think for me for a second, and I'll let you go. Imagine having an elementary-age child, and every week they walk into the zone on Sunday morning, and part of that is they have a volunteer who's there every week, the same volunteer every week, who knows their name and knows their story. And they have fun, and they play together, and then they go into a small group time, and there are 1 or 2 adult volunteers, and 6 or 7 children the same grade, first graders, let's say. And every week, a couple adults and a handful of first graders are together week after week after week. And then your kid graduates into 2nd grade, and the same leaders stay with your child in 2nd grade and 3rd grade in fourth grade. Now imagine your child's a teenager and you're having a bit of a torn relationship with them, but they've got a safe adult or they've got a safe 20-something who's been their small group leader since they were 6. Could you imagine the impact that that person would have in their life? Could you imagine the way that that group could be the thing that helps shape their view of God? This is what I'm dreaming about right now. But I want to tell you, it's going to take all of us making some big steps. It would mean for our volunteers in our elementary ministries, serving every single Sunday for one service. Because it's so important that kids have consistency. But I'm telling you, it could change lives. I don't know. I just work here, okay? I can't say we're going to do it. I can say I've laid a vision out with our team, and I dream about it. And if you dream about it, let's talk. Let's make it happen. I dream about a day when we wouldn't hear a message like this and say, yeah, I know, but I don't have time. I know it's inconvenient. I know it takes your Tuesday night from 7 to 8:30 or your, God forbid, your Thursday morning at 7 a.m. Who's up that early? But I'm telling you, you'll never know until you're there the impact that person had in your life. And the church's job is to create environments where you could form providential relationships. Your job is to take advantage of them. To go out to coffee with a friend, to join a group, to start a ministry team, to get invested, to get involved. You never know the change and the impact that's going to have on your life or someone else's. My dream for you is that you would look back at the end of 2018 and you'd have 1 or 2 people who you could say, those people changed my life. Those people helped me trust God a little more and find a little more freedom in this life. Man, I dream that for every single one of us. And I want it for you because if you choose not to do it, do you know who loses? Everyone loses. You lose because you could be one key relationship away from experiencing God's best for your life. We lose because you could be one key relationship away from someone else experiencing God's best in their life. This community loses because this community has yet to see hundreds of people fully engaged with God and fully engaged with Sonoma County. And when that happens, friends, it's going to transform this community. I'm telling you, God uses people to shape the direction and quality of your life. It's one of the key things God uses to grow your faith. Next week, we're talking about personal spiritual practices. And if you think that's boring, you just don't know it yet. It's so good. So good. And I'm going to talk about 2 things Jesus says, and if at least one of them doesn't totally tick you off and catch you off guard, you're just not paying attention. Let's pray together. God, would you form within this community, either through a church group, a life group, a ministry team? Would you do it through your divine hand bringing people together, through coffee, through a night out, through a new person moving into our community? But God, would you use relationships the way you always have to change and transform lives? Would you remind us, Jesus, that when you walked on this earth, you didn't go it alone, but that you had a community wrapped around you. And God, if you needed it, we need it. So would you do that? As we look in the rearview mirror of our lives at the end of 2018, would we see 1 or 2 people who you used to shape the direction and quality of our lives? We love you, God. We're looking forward to this year. Amen. Amen.